The Committee on House Administration will come to order. We have a quorum present, and I want to say hello to everyone. As we begin, I want to note we're holding this hearing in compliance with the regulations for remote committee proceedings pursuant to House Resolution 8. Generally, we ask committee members and witnesses to keep their microphones muted when not speaking to limit background noise, and members will need to unmute themselves when seeking recognition or when recognized for their questions. Witnesses will also need to unmute themselves when recognized for their 5 minutes of testimony or answering a question. Members and witnesses, the rules ask you to keep your cameras on at all times, even if you need to step away for a moment. Please don't turn the camera off. I'd also like to remind members that the regulations governing remote proceedings require that we can't participate in more than one committee proceeding at the same time. At this time, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend the remarks and have any written statements to be made part of the record, and hearing no objections, that is ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the chair be authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any point, and without objection, that is ordered. So good afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. I welcome to this hearing providing oversight of the renovations to the Canon House office building. This is the second oversight hearing we've held on the Canon renewal project since the start of active construction. In the last Congress, we held a hearing about this stage of phase 2 of the project, and now at a similar point in phase 3, and with more than half the project behind us, it's a good time to reflect upon this large undertaking. The Canon office building is the oldest congressional office building on the Capitol campus. The building first opened its doors in 1908 and is now housing 142 members of Congress, 3 committee hearing rooms, the historic caucus room, the rotunda, and space for congressional support services and restaurant services. The need for the Canon renewal project was well documented. Though isolated changes had been made to the building since its construction to add modern amenities, by the time this project was initiated, there was a dire need for renovation. Defects to key elements of the building, like the HVAC system, plumbing systems, mechanical and electrical equipment, life safety and fire protection systems, and exterior stone, had been accumulating rapidly, and ad hoc fixes to these issues were frequently intrusive and expensive. I'm sure we can all recall when pieces of the building actually fell off onto New Jersey Avenue. The building was also required upgrades for windows, doors, and lighting, as well as insulation to comply with accessibility requirements and energy consumption standards. And from this need came the Canon renewal project, always planned to be a 10-year project, to be conducted in 2 5-year phases. Active construction started in 2015, and from the outset, the project was a challenge, due not only to the difficulties inherent in renovating such an old building, but also due to rigid construction schedule and the fact that the building would remain occupied throughout the expansive renewal efforts. There was also the difficulty of balancing the historical and iconic nature of the building against the need to provide a modern workplace for members, staff, and others. During our previous hearing, we heard testimony about some of the challenges identified during phase 1 and 2 of construction. Many of those challenges were discussed during the last hearing, and today's hearing is an opportunity to determine what lessons were learned in those first phases, what lessons have been learned in the phases completed since the last hearing, and how those lessons will be implemented throughout the remainder of the project. Although we were able to anticipate some of the project's obstacles at its outset, a global pandemic is one challenge that was not part of the original schedule. The Canon renewal project, as with everything else in our world, was impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic led to lost on-site work hours and significant disruptions to the supply chain and corresponding schedule delays. A number of workers also became ill, and as we will hear more about today, it was a priority to keep everyone involved in the project, construction crews, the AOC team, the Capitol Police, among others, as safe and healthy as possible, and a number of protocols were put in place to do that. We're thankful that those who did become sick have recovered. Those health and safety protocols remain just as important today, particularly with the new threats posed by the Delta variant. However, despite this enormous challenge, phase 2 of the project was still completed on time, and members and staff were able to move into their renovated office suites as initially planned. That all this was achieved speaks to the Herculean efforts of the AOC employees, contract workers, and other Ledge branch stakeholders like the Chief Administrative Officer and the Capitol Police. Taya, I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about how we as a committee can continue to support the AOC and project stakeholders as they move forward with this complex undertaking and what is still, unfortunately, an ongoing pandemic. I look forward to hearing how the many lessons learned through this project can be applied not only to its later phases, but to future construction projects undertaken by the AOC. Now I would like to recognize our ranking member, Mr. Davis, for any opening comments that he would like to make.
Good morning and well, good afternoon, actually. And thanks to our witnesses and for joining us today. This hearing is on a very important project that does need more attention. And I'm thankful for the chair calling this hearing. And I do want to recognize the bipartisan and collaborative work that our teams are engaged on to ensure the Canon House building renewal is actually successful. And looking back at the start of this project, it is without question that Canon needed to be renovated. Built over a century ago, the building posed several health, safety, and operational risks. But beyond that, it also needed a facelift to accommodate a more modern Congress. It needed new wiring, technological capabilities, and space. Walking through the finished phase 1 and 2 corridors, the contrast with the original layouts, lighting, and function that I remember as a congressional staffer working for a former member of Congress who was on the 5th floor of Canon for 10 years, the difference in the contrast is stark. Additionally, as many of you know, and as I'm sure we will learn more about today, part of Canon's facelift includes an addition of a full 5th floor of offices. This is going to expand its capacity for staff and committee space, an expansion that we need even more today than we knew back when the project first began. Capitol Campus construction is about as bipartisan a topic as you can find, and Canon's completion will benefit everyone, from freshmen to leadership, Democrats to Republicans. Although there's been much success with the Canon construction project, with the completion of phases 0 through 2, there have also been challenges, and I'll be the first to emphasize how unforeseeable some of those have been. But the pandemic has caused a number of these challenges, including struggles with labor, supply shortage, and cost increases. I know how difficult this has been, so let me say thank you to you and your teams for all you've done to keep the train on the tracks during this unprecedented time. However, as we have discussed, there are also a number of these challenges that, as the title of this hearing highlights, have presented lessons that we need to reflect on and learn from. Phases 3 and 4 of the project are difficult ones that right now I'm not sure how they will possibly be completed on time. And according to my latest numbers, the full project is nearly $137.5 million over budget. In 2019, when our committee last held a hearing on the Canon Renewal Project, I laid out the following priorities: improved transparency, better coordination with stakeholders, including the CAO and the Capitol Police, and completing the project on time and on budget. 2 years later, these remain my greatest points of emphasis that I hope you continue to take seriously and work to fulfill. However, I am going to emphasize one additional priority: to be more responsible with the taxpayers' dollars. That means additional emphasis placed on how our contracts are managed, what equitable adjustments are paid, and the insistence that the quality of work being done will stand the test of time. And thank you again for calling this hearing today and for our teams working in such a bipartisan manner on this issue. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Other members are invited to submit their statements for the record. It is now my pleasure to welcome our witnesses. Joining us this afternoon are the architect of the Capitol, Brett Blanton, architect, Capitol Inspector General, Christopher Falla, and Government Accountability Office Managing Director of Infrastructure Operations, Terry Dorn. The architect of the Capitol, Brett Blanton, has served in this position since January 16th, 2020, and is responsible for the management and maintenance of the U.S. Capitol, the Capitol Visitors Center, the Senate office buildings, the House office buildings, the Supreme Court building, the Library of Congress, the U.S. Botanic Garden, and the Capitol grounds. Prior to becoming architect, Mr. Blanton served as U.S. Naval officer for more than 20 years and Deputy Vice President of the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. Architect of the Capitol, Inspector General Christopher Falla was appointed as the third architect of the Capitol Inspector General in April 2017. He's responsible for promoting the integrity, efficiency, and effectiveness of the architect of the Capitol operations and programs. He and his staff conduct independent audits, evaluations, and investigations, and recommend policies to detect and prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. Before joining the architect of the Capitol, Mr. Falla completed a 26-year naval aviation career, retiring as at the rank of captain. During his last assignment, Mr. Falla was detailed as the director for the Technical Assessment Directorate, leading 19 engineers, conducting inspections and evaluations on major acquisition defense programs, military facilities, and overseeing hotline complaints and congressional inquiries. And finally, Terry Dorn has been with the Government Accountability Office for over 18 years and has served as the Managing Director of Infrastructure Operations for 9 years. He previously served as Director and Assistant Director in the Physical Infrastructure team, primarily leading work on the Capitol Visitors Center and assisting other teams in a wide variety of issues related to construction and facilities management. Prior to coming to the GAO, he spent over 10 years in the private sector as a facility manager and construction project manager for Fortune 500 companies in the specialty chemical and energy sectors. In addition, he spent 10 years as a civilian and engineer officer with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, working on civil works and military construction projects, both here and in Europe. Both IG Falla and Mr. Dorn testified during the 2019 hearing on the Canon renewal project, and we're happy to have them back. Architect Blanton is no stranger to our committee, and so we're pleased to welcome him back as well. I'll remind the witnesses that their entire written statements will be made part of the record, and that the record will remain open for at least 5 days for additional material that they may wish to submit. And we'd ask you to summarize your testimony in about 5 minutes. I believe that our timer is working, although I don't see it on the screen. Yes, but when your time is up, we do ask that you please try and summarize so that we can have an efficient hearing. And first, I would like to turn to you, Mr. Blanton, for your testimony.
Thank you, Chairperson Lofgren, Ranking Member Davis, members of the committee, and the witness panel. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today about the Canon renewal project. This panel knows better than most the complexity of this project cannot be overstated. Each phase of the project is unique with its own risks. The stringent schedule, along with logistical and budgetary parameters, are inconsistent with many industry standards and best practices. The project team has also had to contend with a global pandemic that initially sickened members of the construction team, as well as delayed needed supplies and materials. We quickly instituted extraordinary mitigation practices on the job site, and they are working. I'm proud to say that we have not had a COVID case on the project since March. The team uses daily cleaning protocols and specialized cleaning with CDC and EPA approved disinfectants. We extended and rotated staffing schedules in support of social distancing. We introduced proactive quarantines and required personal protective equipment and hand washing stations. Working together, we are safely continuing the project in the midst of the global pandemic. Delivering phase 2 during the COVID pandemic was truly a Herculean effort. And then the Capitol building breach on January 6th shut the project down for 44 days. While our mission to serve, preserve, and inspire thrives on balancing the needs of aging infrastructure while mitigating the impact on the congressional community and operations, this particular project has experienced unprecedented challenges that we will continue to overcome. Phase 3 of this project is incorporating many of the lessons learned from previous phases to successfully complete this historic building renewal. To the extent possible, we incorporated all known design and construction changes into the base contract to minimize time delays and premium costs associated with change orders. We implemented a new change management process and more aggressive schedule management to control cost acceleration and identify schedule impacts of changes. Other lessons learned include incorporating cost-saving measures, instituting a more robust quality program, and establishing a building official initiative to ensure portfolio-wide compliance with adopted building codes. We have also significantly strengthened our quality program over the course of the project by adding additional staff and more structure. All aspects of construction work are inspected, and if deficiencies are noted, they are tracked until corrected. For certain work, we require the contractor, CCJV, to engage expert third-party firms to inspect work and submit documentation of their findings. The agency also engages specialty staff who are knowledgeable and experienced in the areas they inspect, as well as third-party commissioning of all systems. Improvements in the quality program since phase 1 are evidenced by the significant reduction in punch list items, the focus on team, value, and craftsmanship, and the speed in which the punch list was completed for phase 2. In phase 1, there were 6,734 open punch list items at turnover. 2 years later, for phase 2, this number was reduced by 78%. This reduction reflected the team's commitment to the enhanced quality program. We hope to continue to build upon these improvements through phase 3. Another lesson we incorporated into the project is improving scheduling and coordination with the United States Capitol Police, the Chief Administrative Officer, and other stakeholders. This collaboration allowed us to better manage the numerous activities required to complete member suites once construction elements are finished. The AOC captured all work activities into a master schedule to keep all stakeholders informed of progress. This ensured that member move-ins could occur quickly and efficiently. We appreciate the committee's support and collaboration for this effort. We believe it made significant improvements in delivering phase 2 and will be integral in turnover planning for phase 3. Finally, I'd like to extend my appreciation to the Office of the Inspector General and the General Accountability Office for their continued support for this massive project. The AO team has been aggressive in its efforts to keep costs down. The Inspector General's support in reviewing contract modifications and cost reimbursements assist our efforts to be good stewards of taxpayer resources. The GAO continued analysis of cost and schedule risks is also enormously helpful. We look forward to continuing your work and working with you, and we greatly appreciate your continued support. I'm happy to answer your questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to Mr. Fala. You're now recognized for 5 minutes. Wait.
Chairperson Lofgren, Ranking Member Davis, and members of the committee, good afternoon. I'm pleased to testify today regarding oversight of the renovations to the Canon House office building, lessons learned. Since becoming the architect of the Capitol Inspector General in April of 2017, my team has taken oversight of the Canon House office building renewal project as one of our primary duties among many other competing projects, to include reporting on the AOC's role during the events at the Capitol on January 6th. Since my last testimony regarding the Canon House office building renewal project in 2019, we contracted with Canon Company, an independent public accounting firm and subject matter expert in construction contracting. This was to assist with oversight of the project and to help pursue project economies and efficiencies, as well as to validate adherence to contract conditions, industry standards, and AOC policies and procedures. Since partnering with Canon, our office has issued several products concerning the Canon project to include 3 audit reports, 4 semi-annual reports, 17 monthly executive summaries, weekly project status reports, and daily COVID-19 infection status updates. These audits have resulted in identifying approximately $678,000 non-allowable cost, questioned cost, and undocumented cost. Additionally, we recently announced a Canon project reimbursable cost assessment to assist the AOC in closing one of our recommendations to identify additional unallowable, questioned, or undocumented invoices. To date, we have issued 15 recommendations for improvement to the Canon project, and the AOC has closed 7. We have observed from phase 1 to phase 3 that these closed recommendations have had a positive impact on the Canon project, and we encourage the AOC to continue working to close the remaining 8. An example of this positive impact came from an informal recommendation to add additional project team quality assurance and quality control personnel to reduce the end of phase punch list items. This has shown measurable improvement on the project by reducing punch list items between phase 1 and phase 2 from the thousands to the hundreds. We view all of our audit and evaluation recommendations as means to improve project economy, efficiency, and effectiveness, and for use as a catalog for lessons learned. It is our expectation that the AOC not just implement these recommendations, but consider these and other OIG findings and recommendations during current projects and during the planning of future large complex capital campus construction projects. Overall, it is my conclusion from the work performed by my team and the subject matter expertise from Cotton Company that although adjustments could be made to improve its economy, efficiency, and effectiveness, this large and complex construction project is generally managed well. I make this judgment on the facts that the majority of issues found are commensurate with industry standards, and most of our recommended improvements primarily deal with maintaining adequate documentation to support transactions and management decisions, or adhere to specific contract provisions. It is our hope that the AOC sees the value of our Canon House office building renewal audits and evaluations and continues its cooperation with our office to find future economies and efficiencies. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. And now we turn to our final witness, Mr. Dorn. You're recognized for about 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Chairperson Lofgren, Ranking Member Davis, members of the committee. Good afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity to be here to discuss progress on the Canon House office building renovation. I'll keep my comments brief so as not to tempt the gods of the internet and to allow more time for questions. My written statement provides information on the status of the Canon project and changes to the project's cost estimate over time. They're based on a review of project reports and ongoing discussions with AOC. AOC has substantially completed phases 0, 1, and 2 of the work and is underway on phase 3, which is scheduled to be complete in November of 2022. AOC has reported, however, that there have been some unexpected delays due to COVID and the January 2021 security events. These will need to be mitigated to stay on schedule for November 2022 turnover for the current project phase. Since 2014, the project's budget has grown from $753 million to $890 million in late 2019. Since then, the effects of the 2 new risks have materialized. COVID-19 caused supply chain issues, worker availability problems, and enhanced protection measures. And then the January 2021 security events caused schedule delays due to limited site access. AOC rightly anticipates that there may be extra cost and is undertaking a new cost and schedule risk assessment, which should be finished in December. I'd like to add that this is a leading practice and is a good lesson learned that all of us in the construction industry have been working on. When this is complete, AOC will be better able to forecast cost and inform Congress of any changes needed. This concludes my oral statement, and I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dorn. Now we will turn to members for their questions, and I'd like to turn first to our ranking member, Mr. Davis, for any questions he may have.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses once again. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Blanton. you were sworn in as architect of the Capitol a year ago, and you inherited this project. Something we talked about before you took the job. This is the most expensive project the AOC has ever overseen. What have you observed from the project that you've inherited that you see as needing to improve, and how are you incorporating those changes?
Thank you. I think it's a great question. And it actually goes to similar, my answer is going to be similar to what I talked to you during the interview process, to focus on quality. And when one focuses on a construction project on schedule, they tend to lose quality and cost. And they end up at the end almost losing schedule too, because if you put in, they sometimes cut corners, contractors sometimes cut corners to adhere to a very strict schedule. And then you have to go back afterwards and fix those problems, and you end up oftentimes missing the scheduling delivery. So we are continuing to focus on number one, on quality, and number two, on schedule. I look at it this way: if it's going to be 100 years before the next renovation is building, we have to build it so it can last 100 years.
Well, I wish that the next couple of generations the best for that 100 years of quality. Hey, Mr. Blanton, have there been any security adjustments made to the plans of phase 3 and phase 4 post January 6th? And has the Capitol Police Board been involved in the construction plans or approval at any point?
The Capitol Police Board does not get involved in the approval of construction documents. The security features that we are currently doing now are an agreement between the Capitol Police, the contractor, and the AOC. Since this is a unique project in its size, they have special badging for all the contractors, personnel who work there, a special screening station for them so that they can get in and out of the project without affecting any members that are working in their offices in the Canon building.
Great. Are there any outstanding security matters of the Canon project that would require any board action?
None that I know of.
Okay, great. Inspector General Fala, can you, you reviewed your team's recent findings regarding the AOC's practices of approving reimbursement requests made by contractors. And can you give a few examples of what your team found in the sampling?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. That was an interesting audit. We looked at a sample of 60 invoices received from the contractor to AOC for approval for reimbursable expenses. Some of the things that we found in 34 of our invoices we felt were not reimbursable. Some things were for flowers, some were for travel, some were for alcohol, and our biggest find was for reimbursable expenses for the last hearing that they attended, which was around $234,000 for legal fees. We put that to the AOC to relook at and make a determination on that.
So wait a minute here. So one of your findings was that over $234,000 in legal fees went to prepare for a hearing in front of this committee. Who billed for that?
Well, obviously, it was the law firm who or lawyers who were preparing the contractor for the hearing. They billed for that.
Clark Construction's lawyers billed the architect $234,000 for hearing prep. Huh.
Actually, they billed Clark, who then Clark asked for reimbursable expenses from the architect for the hearing.
Wow. Mr. Blanton, what's the latest disposition of that request from the IG?
Yeah, unfortunately, and that is quite a common practice of consultants, because there was no allotment in the contract for hearings or preparation for hearings. And so we think the fee is excessive, and so that's what we're going after them for. But there is going to be some money that we collect from it, but some of that they're going to retain.
Well, thank you for doing that. I certainly would encourage you to do more so if bills like that come in. And I didn't think Madam Chair and I were that scary to require $234,000 to just prep to come in front of us. Maybe they were worried of Jamie Raskin, who knows? So, hey, with that, Madam Chair, I'll go back.
A gentleman yields back, and Mr. Raskin, who I don't think is very scary, is now recognized for his questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lofgren. Thank you, Mr. Davis, for opening up that line of inquiry. I'm also somewhat astonished that there's a bill for $234,000 to prepare for one of our hearings. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine that it would take more than, at the most, 2 hours or 3 hours to get ready for a hearing. So yeah, I think that we deserve some further explanation for that. And just for any other law firms out there, if you're preparing people for a hearing, you don't want to be billing hundreds of thousands of dollars for it, because that's what we're going to be asking about. Maybe it's a good diversionary tactic. I don't know, but it certainly concentrates the mind. Let's see. To the architect of the Capitol, Mr. Blanton, tell me how you've worked to improve communication and transparency with all of the project stakeholders, so that everybody who's got a piece of it can figure out what's going on.
So we have routine project level meetings where all the stakeholders are involved, and this includes oversight staff. One of the other things that was really, really important for us, and I think was the key that brought all the stakeholders together to get over the finish line for phase 2, was the fact that we built this integrated schedule of all the activities that all the stakeholders need to complete before you can have an occupied space. In this way, we were enabled to, so that we don't have somebody trying to do carpet at the same time that somebody's doing drapes or painting. We're able to balance that out and have a very logical sequence for a work product.
Can I just go back to the $230,000 for a second? Is that something that you brought to our attention, or is that just coming from the Inspector General?
It came from his report.
But okay, but so in other words, did you approve that? I mean, did that seem like a normal expense to you?
This occurred about a year and a half before. I believe about a year and a half before I came on board, I believe.
Okay, but if you got something like that today, would you say, hey, why is it costing hundreds of thousands of dollars to get ready for a hearing where you're just giving us a status report on where things are?
My first reaction would be, like I said, is the cost is excessive, but there is a reasonable price that they would be allowed.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, I just want to echo the chair and the ranking member about, the taxpayers' dollars here. I mean, I think people want to invest in a legislative, suite of buildings that make sense for us so we can get our work done. But I mean, it shouldn't be the opportunity for that kind of, for that kind of expenditure. All right. To the Inspector General, you had, I think, at one point noted some delays in responsiveness on the part of the architect's office. Have you been able to deal with that problem, and are you now able to get information when you need it, Mr. Perla?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. Yes, we have improved our communication with the architect. They have become more responsive. I think they've brought on extra FTEs on the project as well that can handle some of the loads of questions and requests for information that we require to do our audit work. So they have become much more responsive for this project for sure.
Okay. And finally, I just had a question about the punch list. Let's see, what impact do the punch list items have on the project budget and the timeline?
Well, in my opinion, punch lists are, if this is for me, Mr. Raskin, the punch list items will delay entry into some of the offices. Possibly it could be rework that needs to be done, and it's also an inconvenience to the members who will be in an office that have poor quality of work. That delays the project possibly from entering. It also takes manpower off other sites, work site areas where they could be better used.
I yield back, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Stile is now recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Raskin took some of my thunder on the attorney fees. So let me just dive over to a new topic to keep us rolling on some of these key things. To keep the Canon project online and on budget, there's been a number of scope changes. Specifically, the scope has been narrowed to fit within the budget and project phase delivery deadlines. Could one of you comment on what the most of note scope changes are that you see, in particular, the role of the Canon caucus coming out of the scope project?
Let's answer that.
I'll start, but I just want to make sure I understood the question because at least on my end, it was going in and out a little bit. You want to know what scope changes occurred between phases? Is that the
or how you view that playing out?
Okay, yeah. So I think GAO can also opine on this as well because that's not an uncommon practice in multi-phase projects when you are working on budgetary constraints. Where you'll move something from, say, phase 1 into phase 2 or phase 2 into phase 3, and sometimes you even move stuff forward. So as you notice, many of the caucus rooms, the caucus room and then the committee rooms have slipped a phase in order to get the main purpose of the construction, which is to have member suites available for the change in Congress.
So maybe a follow-up there then, Mr. Blandon. Do you still expect these to be done on time with the rest of the Canon project?
Yes, yes.
And do you see additional scope changes being needed to take place in the future?
I don't see any additional scope changes that would occur from phase 3 to phase 4.
Okay, so then maybe one step further is looking at particular some of these the delays in particular due to security factors. Are we expecting equitable adjustment claims to be made by the contractor?
So we're in discussion with the contractor for acceleration, and this would be to bring in additional staff so they could do work on multiple floors at the same time to help bring the schedule back. That cost is roughly $1.6 million. And then what will yield, though, is no additional days on the back end that the contractor is due.
Okay, and then maybe a final question is as we look at the Canon renovation project as it's currently scoped, do you still believe it can be, as of now, completed on time and on budget to the current projections?
So I have concerns with the budget for phase 4, and I'll explain why. And I think GAO can weigh in as well. Cost of, as we've all seen in the press, cost of lumber is twice what it was a year ago. Cost of fuel up 80%. Cost of steel is up 70%. Copper is at the highest level in 10 years. Labor shortages. We have, to finish phase 2, we actually had every single plasterer in the mid-Atlantic region, from Philadelphia all the way down to into North Carolina, West Virginia. Every single one of them was on this project. And that was because COVID made it so a number of people couldn't work. And so cost of labor is high because there's labor shortages. I hope we have time because we're not awarding that phase of the contract now. Hopefully the economy bears out and these inflationary costs for construction materials and supplies reduce. But I do have concern if the costs are increased by that much.
So the rising costs of goods across the board are going to negatively impact us in stage 4 is your current projection.
If they are as they are now.
With a limited time, if either of the other witnesses would like to comment on that, I'd love to hear your opinion on that as well.
This Terry, I'll comment for a second. I agree that reducing scope or moving scope out to the right is a very legitimate way to try to keep a project within budget. A couple of examples that I think we've talked with the AOC about that have happened so far were, I believe in the beginning, there were some blast windows that may have been removed. I believe there's some plaza improvements that may not happen unless some additional funding is found. And I am also concerned, as Mr. Blanton is, that if we're not able to mitigate and overcome these delays and cost increases due to COVID, that we're going to have to look at reducing scope again. And that's okay with us. If that's okay with y'all, it's all about meeting expectations between Congress and the AOC.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Recognizing my time, Madam Chairwoman, I'll yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And let me say good afternoon to all of you. And thank you so very much for joining this discussion today. The witnesses are experts in their own space. And just thank you, each of you, for all that you do. You know, I'm a little intrigued by the attorney fee conversation. I'm still a licensed attorney, actually. Served as a judge and an attorney for many, many years. And anytime the subject of attorney fees comes up, I'm always all ears. Can you translate the $234,000 into an hourly rate for the attorneys? Can you help me with that? Either witness would be fine. Yes. Yes.
I was going to say, I'll have to get back to you with that since it predates my time.
You know, when I first started practicing law, Madam Chair, the rate here in North Carolina was $60 an hour. And I thought that was a lot of money. It was $1 per minute. But I understand that Washington, D.C. lawyers now charge between $500 and $600 per hour. That is just unimaginable. But let me go to you, to the architect, Mr. Blanton. Thank you for your service. Are you confident that the lessons that we learned are being incorporated into phases 3 and 4? Are we comfortable with that?
I am, and I'll say one of the big things we did that will yield cost savings is the fact that all of the lessons learned and the unknowns that we had in phase 2, we put that into the base contract for phase 3. So we were negotiating the entire contract, including those unknowns. Great examples is where we found 2x2 hole cutouts on structural slab floors. So we knew they were there now. We didn't know they were there in the beginning of phase 2. So instead of negotiating with them after the fact where they know they have us under a pair of pliers, we negotiate that at the beginning when they're trying to get the entire contract.
Let me speak to those individuals who now occupy the Canon building. What is the process for the occupants who may have questions or concerns? Where do they go to receive answers and assistance to their concerns?
Their first point of contact, which will then open up the door to the rest of AOC, is through the Canon House office building, the House Service Center that we have. That opens up the entire AOC for any question or concern, and activates people that are outside of just the House office building on my office. It could be people that are, it could end up getting into my chief engineer or my chief security officer.
All right. And to the Inspector General, again, thank you, sir, for your testimony, and thank you for your work. I like to say that IGs simply call balls and strikes. You kind of call it like it is, and thank you for doing that. Do you anticipate performing additional audits as the project moves through phases 3 and 4?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. Absolutely. We are committed to conducting at least two audits every fiscal year on the project or more that for things that rise up. We currently have an audit, as I spoke about in my oral, to relook at the reimbursables, such as the ones that we found in the 60 sampled. We're looking at all of the invoices right now to close out a recommendation for the architect by providing them a list of invoices we believe to be either unreasonable, unallowable, or undocumented, for them to try and recuperate some cost there. We're also going to look at materials to make sure that with the rising cost of inflation and the construction project, material costs that the contractor is still providing quality material and or not providing material that was not part of the contract.
Sure. One of the witnesses earlier mentioned the term equitable adjustment. I know what each one of those words means individually, but in this context, what is an equitable adjustment? Whichever witness mentioned that a few moments ago. Was it the architect who mentioned an equitable adjustment? Yeah,
This is
yeah,
Terry. I don't know who mentioned it, but
yeah.
in my world, equitable adjustment is just another name for a claim.
Okay.
It's a nice way of saying we will submit a claim if you don't satisfy our equitable adjustment.
I see. All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think all of the questions that I was planning to ask have been covered, so I will not prolong. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think Ms. Leger Fernandez has had to leave, so I will ask just a couple of questions. First, Mr. Architect, I did not know till this hearing about the claim of attorney's fees, which honestly I think is outrageous. And I hope that we will minimize that expense as we talk to the claimant, but also let parties know in the future that having a legal team prepare them from a hearing is not something we consider a valid expense. I mean, that is unnecessary just to have an oversight hearing. It's ridiculous. I would like to know, in terms of moving forward, I think you, Mr. Blanton, said that we might need to scale back the project depending on how costs escalate. If we need to do value engineering, I'm interested in how we involve this committee in the decisions that need to be made in terms of value engineering. What process do you envision?
I envision my staff working with your staffs and hand in glove, and then briefing members if we get to that point. We'll, as the GAO noted, we'll know by December what the impacts of the current economy will be on phase 4. And that's going to be a very salient moment.
Then we will be on the lookout for that process. Given the emergence of the Delta variant and the concern that that is raising across the United States, what impact do you see in terms of further protocols to protect people from that variant? And do you expect that that will cause further delays or not?
So as we discussed previously, when we had the first COVID spike, the protocols cause inefficiency. And so that can be handled 2 ways. One is requiring more time at the end, which is something that's untenable. The other is what we did with Clark previously, is they have a commitment to meet a certain schedule with a certain amount of resources. And if they need to add more resources to meet that part of their schedule, then that's something that is on their end, not necessarily our end. We are providing them with additional funds for all the additional cleanings and such. And we're going to continue to do that. Throughout the entire project, we estimate that it's going to cost the neighborhood of $6 million for COVID expenses. In the April timeframe, at the recommendation of the OAP, we stopped doing indoor fogging once a week. And we're in constant contact with them to ensure that we are keeping up with the protocols. One of the things that we continue to have is a mask mandate. We are strongly emphasizing vaccinations. We require all of our contractors and subcontractors to do a health safety specific for COVID plan, which then will list of how they're going to deal with people who are vaccinated and people who are not vaccinated, what protocols they're going to have in place, and make sure that is approved by us through OAP's guidance.
So that's important to know, because some of what we thought initially was necessary. As it turns out, and we've learned more about the disease, I mean, you don't need to wipe down your groceries, the things that people did that didn't really have an impact, and then the things that did. Let me ask you, Mr. Fala, in your opinion, do you think it would be beneficial to the AOC to have a dedicated audit staff reviewing costs regularly to ensure that only allowable costs are being reimbursed? I don't want to talk just about the preparation for the oversight hearing, but any other thing to work as a team with the AOC to do auditing of reimbursables?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chairman, person. We've talked with previous architects and acting architects about instituting audit teams into this project or future projects so that it's baked, the cost of an audit is baked into that. We would require still that the IG have oversight over that audit team to keep it independent so that it's not a contracted firm that is being overseen by the architects themselves or any of the project managers, because that could sway the independence of that auditor. So we recommend it. I think in this case, there are teams within the AOC that review the reimbursables and make decisions on approving them. Based on what we've seen thus far, although $234,000 is a large number, most of the things that we found that added up to about $500,000 worth of reimbursables in those 60 invoices were small. And I think that the pass through of the small reimbursables just being signed off could improve just by the team doing a better job of it or taking those a little bit more seriously. We look at them as death by 1,000 cuts.
Right.
So it all added up. And we're going to look at more now and provide those to the architect to help them out in this case. We're using our contractor Cotton & Company to help us. It's going to cost us $18,000 to do that review. So we don't think that's a large investment. So even if the architect were to adopt something similar, it could hopefully go cheaper, or we could ask us to do it each time to review that before they pay them out.
Well, as you and the architect discuss this further, hopefully you can let the committee know what decisions you're making moving forward on this item, you and Mr. Blanton. And I see you both nodding yes, and I note that my time has expired. And all time has expired for the committee to ask questions. So we will thank our witnesses for appearing today. And as I noted earlier, we may have additional questions for you. And if that is the case, we will send them to you, and we would ask that you respond to them in writing, and the hearing record will be held open for those responses. There being no further business before the committee at this time, I will thank all of the members and the witnesses for their participation, and note that the committee will now stand adjourned.